Well, here we are again.
Yeah, Happy New Year and everything, right?
Thank you. You too for the first episode of 2023. So yes, you had a quiet time over Christmas and New Year. I understand.
Well, it was just quiet, It's just another really quiet holiday. I mean, I'm not really the person to kind of ask for crazy things to happen, but you had some fun, I think.
I went on a road trip. So Australia's quite a big country, as many know. It's about the size of the continental US. And my dad lives about 2,000 kilometres away, and we did a road trip. And so it was 2,000 kilometres down there, and we sort of drove around for about another 1,000 kilometres, doing various things, and then 2,000 kilometres back. So it's quite a trip. And let's just say, saying let's drive 2,000 kilometres and back is a lot easier than driving 2,000 kilometres and back. It was an interesting trip. And Australia's a sparsely populated continent. We were driving in the southeast, which is the most populated part of the country. And yet, at one point, we ended up, this is the road the GPS chose for us. So the GPS sends us on this road between sort of two medium-sized towns or cities at 107 kilometres of basically nothing. There was one tiny little settlement in the middle of this 107 kilometres, and we're driving over mountains at night over this thing. And I have to say, if I took the trip again, I'd probably pick a different path. There were a couple of other roads that were a bit longer, that were main roads, that were better roads, and I probably would have chosen that, a bit more flat ground, especially at night.
I see.
Yes.
What side of the road do you guys drive on?
We drive on the left.
Left, okay, right. So
yes.
All right. So the English convention, I think.
Exactly, that's right. So I've driven quite a bit in North America, having lived in Canada, obviously. So I'm quite comfortable driving on either side of the road. A few years ago, I went to San Francisco for a few days, and I hadn't driven on the right for quite a number of years. And it took me about sort of 3 or 4 days. And and after 3 or 4 days, I was really comfortable again driving on the right. But yeah, so it's not as hard as it sounds to switch backwards and forwards. But the main thing is, concentrate and turns. When you're at the front, the first person making a turn, that's when you've really got to concentrate. It's okay if you're following someone, that's easy.
Yeah.
But when you're the first person making a turn, that's when you really got to be keep your eye on the ball and then think where you're going to go. And in fact, in San Francisco, it occurred to me, first time in many years, I did a U-turn from the right side, and I hadn't done one of those in many, many years. And that was interesting. I had to sort of think that through. Like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So,
right, exactly. Now, I don't think I've ever done a U-turn from the left, actually.
Right, exactly. So if you ever find yourself in that first situation, it's about keeping your eye on the ball and thinking, okay, where is my car going and where am I going to end up? And yeah, that's right. You do, I said, a few days of probably having to really concentrate. And after that, the brain adjusts. It's surprisingly easy, I think, to adjust, to switch backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Right. All right, so what have we got on the list today to kick off this year?
Well, so I've got a few things. It might sound like a fairly morose topic, but I've actually been writing a series of articles on Nazism and fascism. So I came up with a definition of fascism. This is something I think fascism is notoriously hard to define.
Well, it's not well defined in like the everyday discourse. I'm pretty sure Antifa aren't the authorities on that.
Exactly, and this is actually what started me off with this entire route. The fact that our opponents call us fascists and throw the term around, often without defining it. And from time to time, I ask them to define it if I'm talking to these people, and they never can, or they give very, very weak definitions. But it has, I think a lot of experts have even said, it's a relatively difficult term to define. And so I've finally come up with a definition for myself that I think works for me. But maybe some people might argue that I cheated because I actually came up with 2 definitions. I came up with a narrow definition. I came up with a broad definition. And all I'm arguing is it's somewhere between those 2.
Okay, well, let's hear it. I mean, you're kind of teasing us here.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. All right. So let me see. I'll go to Wikifeed where I put the definition up. Actually, I put it up as an article on the Voice for Men recently too. I was kind of disappointed actually that I didn't get a lot of or actually a definition of fascist, I should say, I'm doing. But I didn't get a lot of response on it, actually. I was hoping for more discussion. It's quite interesting when we post articles on A Voice for Men and so forth. So, certain types of topics will definitely get a lot more conversation than other types. And I find the more, I guess, more abstract concepts that perhaps interest me a lot of the time aren't the ones that really prompt the discussions. It's really the more concrete stuff, I suspect.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm now seeing it. Yeah, I didn't see that you posted it before. So
yes, yeah, no worries. Yeah, because it was just after Christmas. Actually, it's probably also not the ideal time to do it. So, actually, maybe I cheated a little bit, but the narrow definition. Okay, the term fascist actually comes from the Italian National Fascist Party. That's
right.
That. So they were fascist by definition because they were the ones who came up with the term, right? So I argued that the narrowest possible definition is somebody who's a member of the Italian National Fascist Party, and that the ideology can be clearly defined in that case because it's the party manifesto. So even now, it still seems like a little bit of a cheat. But basically, broadly, I'm saying that the broadest definition that I think I will accept for fascism is something that adheres to Italian fascism, Nazism, the ideology of Francisco Franco in Spain, or someone trying to re-establish a very similar system. If I have to put it in one sentence, that's the first sentence of my broad definition, and then I go on to explain it. To me, that's the broadest reasonable definition, and anything that goes beyond that is a misuse of the term.
I see.
Yeah, so that's how I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, now at the risk of doing just that, I'm actually going to see how my own kind of what I've come to sort of define it in like very boiled down senses kind of gels with it. I tend to see fascism as more like an appeal to unity above everything.
Yes, actually, that is a fair statement. I would say that personally, I would say that alone would be too broad to define fascism, but I do think that is a big component of fascism because
okay.
Yeah, well, that's where I would see it. So I defined it as, if I go on to define it as nationalist, dictatorial, and corporatist. So, which does come back to that unity, because unlike socialism, where socialists will nationalize industry and make the government actually do things, in the fascist countries, private enterprise continued and arguably continued to flourish, at least in the short term. But it was still expected to support the government, which comes back. I think you're absolutely nailing with the unity point. In fact, that's even tempting maybe to put that word in there because, it absolutely, corporations in Nazi Germany were expected to support the ideology and the aims of the state, even though they remained independent corporations or independent up to a point, I suppose. Does that make sense?
It's more of a facade than that illusion of private enterprise and freedom. You know, you're still free. You're still a private company, but do what we do or else.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were still private in the sense that they were free to, have profit and shareholders, and I'm sure the companies that were making arms for Nazi Germany, for example, were doing quite well in the early years of the war, and their shareholders were getting dividends and all that sort of thing that we would view as capitalist. But they were still required to. There's some sort of limits perhaps to that freedom, in the sense that politically or ideology they still have to support the state. That's been how it. I think after a number of years of thinking about it, that was what I ended up coming up with as the sort of broadest reasonable definition.
I see. Yeah, it's not, I just love it when some of the socialists go that, well, capitalism and fascism were like they fit together like a glove or something. No. I only define capitalism as there's a true free market sense, and not in any kind of tied with the government sort of, which is basically just corporatism.
Yeah, exactly. I use the word corporatist here instead of capitalist for that reason, exactly, because I don't think it's fair to say it's capitalist in that sense, because the companies are not free to pursue a lot of different avenues. They had to focus on those, on supporting the government. Right. I also included Francisco Franco's government, and there's debates about whether he was really a fascist or not. He certainly leaned that way. But I decided, in order to make this definition as broad as I could reasonably make it, I decided to include him in it. But if some people want to argue that Franco's Spain was not really fascist, I think there's probably, reasonable arguments to be made there.
I see. It's not one of the more well-known ones, I think. So.
No, and so I actually so a few things that are associated with fascism are xenophobia, and also making war, essentially being having a war economy. But as I mentioned in the article, xenophobia was much less pronounced in Spain and Italy. In Italy, I think it really only appeared because after pressure, so Mussolini ended up buckling under pressure from Hitler to basically start persecuting Jews. But initially, as far as I know, he didn't actually do that.
Race didn't factor in then, basically.
What's that, sorry?
Would you say that race didn't really factor in?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. I think that I'm not sure that it's intrinsically central to fascism. It's certainly central to Nazism, but I'm not sure it's central to fascism more broadly. And going to war is another aspect of this. Obviously, Hitler intended to go to war for a long time. Italy did go to war and invade Ethiopia, but that was a relatively minor conflict. It didn't sort of have the massive expansionism of Nazi Germany, and Franco never went to war at all. So I think there's an argument to be made that even that pursuit of conflict or expansion isn't necessarily part of it as well. So for the first time in my life, I've come up with a definition I think, at least at this point, I'm comfortable with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty well spoken in terms of a definition. I think this could stand to be more posted in social media. I don't know if I caught it when it first came out. So
yeah, I probably didn't pick a very good time. I did it right after, it was early in the new year that I posted it. I developed this over the last month or two and posted the article on ABFM, I think on the 3rd of January, something like that it was. So, yeah. So I would absolutely be interested to hear people's feedback on this. And as I said, all I've done is essentially actually put bounds on the definition. So I'd argue that the definition is somewhere in there.
Exactly.
And I think, I think there's decent counter arguments to be made over things like Franco in Spain, as I said. So, and that's valid, given that I've used him as in a couple of the examples that are talking about the broad definition. If he were to be removed from the definition of fascism, that might affect the limits of the definition as well. So, anyway, I was going to say the last thing I was going to say, I guess, is no fascist state lasted very long. Even if we include Franco, it didn't last more than about 30, it was 40 years or something like that. So I actually personally, I guess getting off the track, but I've been thinking about this for a while too. And I suspect if Nazi Germany had somehow survived World War II, and I don't know if there'd been a ceasefire or whatever, I think within a generation or two, the wheels would have started to come off its ideology. A lot of ideological societies really start to fall when the original founders die. And I suspect we would have seen Nazism probably soften, in all honesty, and that doesn't excuse their crimes in their original crimes, but I suspect we would have seen their society soften, and we probably would have seen, I suspect, probably going off the track a little bit here, but I've been thinking about, alternative history stories and so forth, and what it might look like. I suspect we would see that the racism would remain in Nazi Germany in 50, 100 years later, but probably the more violent aspects of the society would gradually decline, and then the society might even have something like a reckoning about its origins. I mean, something like, a lot of people pushing the West now using terms like colonizers as well and so forth. I would suggest, that a lot of although no society is without crimes in its origin, I think in Western society, a lot of them aren't as bad as are being portrayed. Whereas imagine a Nazi society that survives and 100 years later is being called upon to come to terms with its own origins and the crimes that were committed. So, I think that we would have, if Hitler had survived, I suspect that we would have seen something like that. So
right.
That's probably quite a track.
Well, in terms of totalitarian societies kind of eventually kind of going off the rails, one thing I'm thinking of is the Soviet Union, because, they weren't, collapse by force or anything like that, right? It's not during wartime in the sense that we understand it that this sort of thing happened. It actually did in fact collapse.
That's right, exactly. It's a good example, actually, and there are other dictatorial societies as well that are perhaps now starting to have a look at, take a closer look at their history. In fact, the fall of the Soviet Union was really fascinating, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and a couple of years later, the Soviet Union dissolving. And as you say, it didn't dissolve in war; it just evaporated, and did so quite quickly.
I was actually thinking of the West and East Germany situation right after you mentioned the possibility when you were kind of talking about how Nazi Germany would have collapsed. So in our own history, we had the West and East Germany, and that kind of collapsed basically on its own, didn't it?
It did, exactly. And there's some interesting arguments. I don't know how you feel about it. Ronald Reagan's supporters have taken some credit for this, for the fall of the Soviet Union, arguing that basically, essentially, the US, his aim was to outspend the Soviet Union, and that he succeeded in doing that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I personally think it's probably partly true, at least. What do you think?
Well, I don't have any concrete thoughts on how Reagan took, or his followers rather, took credit for this. And that kind of requires more thoughts, more research on my part. I haven't really given it thought.
There's there's something that it's going to be pretty obscure, actually. There's something. There was a military operation called Mole Cricket 19. I don't know if you've probably never heard of it. No. So it's not very well known, but it may be a seminal moment in this. So Mole Cricket 19 was an Israeli military operation in late 82, early 83 in Lebanon. And what happened was basically Syrian and Israeli military forces basically got tangled in a fairly substantial fight over the space of about a day. And there'd been a series of these military operations, and in this particular one, the Syrians took on the Israelis. And at the end of the day, something like 80 Syrian jets had been downed and not a single Israeli jet. And some historians are now arguing that this was a complete slap in the face for the Politburo and the Soviet Union. And for the first time, many of them realized that their technology just didn't stack up to the West anymore, and that in a conventional war, they'd lose. And some people are now arguing, some historians are now arguing, that this was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, that they basically realized that they'd fallen behind the West by 10 or 20 years militarily, and that they weren't going to be able to catch up. And that was it. And then 7 years later, 7 years later, the Berlin Wall fell, and 9 years later, the Soviet Union dissolved. So I don't know if it's true, but that's what some people are arguing anyway. So Mole Cricket 19.
I see. Mole Cricket 19?
Mole cricket. So a mole cricket is, I don't know if I didn't see one for a lot. I only saw one recently, actually. They are in Australia. It's a type of cricket, and they burrow, hence the name mole cricket. And in fact, funny story, actually. One night, I hadn't been back in Australia long. It was 2011 or so. We'd just moved back to Australia, and we had a hardwood floor in the house. We bought a house. We were sitting there. We have a hardwood floor, and I could hear across the floor, clunk, 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 clunk. And I'm thinking, what is that? This little thing about 1.5 inches across walks across my floor. Okay. And I had never seen anything like this. And of course, this is Australia, right? So you don't necessarily want to be touching things you don't know, insects you don't know, because it might be bad for you. So I didn't touch this thing initially. And it just walked across my floor. We were just making this clunking noise. This happened again about half a dozen times. Every couple of weeks, this thing would walk across my floor, right? And I actually became to suspect that it was actually the same creature, right? Okay. So I got ready, and I got a container, okay, right? And finally, it happened again. I heard the clunk, and I'm sitting there watching TV, and I hear the clunking. Right, I grabbed my container, and I captured this thing. I didn't hurt it. It's captured, just in a plastic container. So now I'm studying it, and I thought, have I discovered something new, some amazing new creature? Am I going to be famous? Did a bit of searching online. It took me a couple of days, actually, and I ended up determining it was a mole cricket. Mole crickets are harmless, as all crickets are, as far as I know. And so I released it back into the wild after a couple of days. By all accounts, it was fine. So I got to burrow into the ground again. And it didn't visit me again for a while, but eventually it did return about 2 months later. So it's probably stayed off later for a little while, but a couple of months later, I saw it again. Anyway, yeah, so mole crickets, they're interesting creatures. If you ever want to see, it really looks like something that somebody's just stuck together from parts of different creatures. Strangest looking things. But anyway, so I guess they have them in the Middle East too, because this operation was called Mole Cricket 19. So
okay, sure. Right.
But yes, that's my encounter with the mole cricket.
All right. Before we get too much off the track of the whole fascism thing, I think you had some other thoughts on that one. You want to talk about the Man Who Didn't Salute.
Oh, yes, the Man Who Didn't Salute. So I'm currently doing an article for A Voice for Men. This is a fairly famous picture that has been circulating online. They have a pretty good idea where it was. It was apparently a ship. It's believed to have been a shipyard in 1936 in Nazi Germany. Many people will have probably seen this picture. There are all sorts of people, hundreds of people doing the Nazi salute, and one guy at the back, close to the back, with his arms crossed. Now, there's a couple of Wikipedia makes the argument that he's one particular guy. In actual fact, it seems that his identity isn't known, but there are a couple of likely candidates. The Wikipedia article does mention an alternative candidate, but having looked at it, I think there's a fair argument to say it's him. But anyway, I've been producing a series of articles on A Voice for Men called What Men Do, and these articles are talking about, because we see a tendency, and this is mentioned in the Red Pill, when it's negative, it's men. When it's positive, it's people. Cassie J picked this up. It's often something we hear. Cassie J picked it up and mentioned it in the Red Pill documentary. So the response to this is what men do. One of these articles that I put together a little while ago was a dog that was stuck actually on the edge of a waterfall. You can find the article on A Voice for Men, and about 7 or 8 men worked as it was basically down into a drainage system, and this poor dog had got stuck, and the dog knew it was in danger but couldn't free itself. Since it was afraid if it moved, it was going over the waterfall. And 7 or 8 guys got together and actually went out and basically formed a human chain, so one guy could go down, get the dog, get back up again. So that was an example of put as what men do. This is another example, I think. There's a couple of different guys that this might be, but nevertheless, whoever the guy is, he was standing up to Nazi Germany. This is 1936, which means the Nazis were in power, and it takes some backbone to not do a Nazi salute when you're in Nazi Germany in 1936. So,
exactly, because everybody's saying, well, if I were in Nazi Germany, I would have stood up to them all the time, but they probably would not have, right? Like,
I tell you what, Nazis are scary. Nazis would be, yes. Most people would not, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Well, yes. Well, I want to make a point here. Nazis are scary, or they certainly were scary, but exactly. I think that is more the reason why we can't be blanket describing people as Nazis just for disagreeing with them.
Very good point. That's right. The term should retain its power.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Like, I almost say it's as serious and not treated as seriously as by others as any false accusation.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. That is a really good point, actually. In fact, it is defamatory to call someone a Nazi, given how bad Nazism is. And if someone is generally shown to be a Nazi, they generally won't be employable and so forth. Right. So, absolutely, this is something I do see among the woke, and I don't like to frame things in a left-right paradigm. But in terms of, in terms of talking about the woke, which unfortunately is mostly on the left, but I think it's more complicated than that. But they do have this tendency towards weakening terms, like calling people Nazis. And one term that I always shake my head at is rapey. I mean, of all the people to be saying that rape, to me, that is reducing the impact of the word rape. To say rapey, they use the word rapey all the time. And it seems, given that they're people who are trying to toughen up rape laws in general, right, it always amazes me that they use the word rapey in this manner.
Exactly, because I think they're trying to pocket size everything. Like, because we kind of touched on this a little bit in the past about changing definitions and such, and changing contexts. I mean, I'm thinking of microaggressions, because, we're trying to pocket size something that's more serious, just so they have something to complain about. I was microaggressed or something like that. And and right now I'm kind of thinking of how Kamil Palia complained, and people should know that I'm not horribly fond of her, but
Same.
quoting her. She was complaining about some university student who said that she was mini raped, and that really just amounted to somebody kind of looking at her legs or something, you know. So it's like they want to have some kind of victimhood as a badge of honor and make it small enough to actually make it like a badge to carry it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. They bring it back to themselves, don't they, and their situation versus, say, talking about real problems that are occurring, like, for example, the fact that the Taliban government in Afghanistan has again banned women from university. Mm-hmm. Now, I watched what the response from feminists, and well, I could call it muted, but I haven't seen anything at all. Right. There's been no response from them at all. Yeah. And in actual fact, I challenged one prominent feminist on Twitter to respond to it, and nothing at all from them. So this is a very serious issue that's facing women in Afghanistan. Where is the National Organization for Women? Where is the Fawcett Society? Why aren't they in the face of Western politicians, telling them to take it to the Afghanistan government to telescope this? And they're not doing anything.
Right, exactly.
It's easier to criticize Western men, I suppose. We're not scary.
Right, exactly. They're not the ones that would blow you up.
Exactly. That's right. Like Nazis in 1936 Germany, Taliban today are actually a scary bunch of dudes. Like the same with ISIS, actually, or ISIL in Iraq and Syria, when they were forcing minority women into sex slavery. Mm-hmm. And again, National Organization for Women, nothing. Fawcett Society, nothing. You can go to the National Organization for Women website and search there, and you'll find essentially virtually no mention of these topics at all. When they are mentioned, it's very muted.
Right. You know, sometimes it's moments like this that I kind of wonder whether feminism has both the political wings at work, because the right-wing feminists are the ones that would complain about this kind of stuff while the left is silent, depending on what culture we're tackling sometimes.
You're thinking that it's become so one-sided that basically they're missing that other voice, the more conservative side. I mean, look at people like Christina Hoff-Sommers and Camille Parley and so forth, who call themselves feminists, but are probably more on the conservative side. Yeah, so you think if they were more powerful, we might hear a voice.
Yeah, I'm just saying. The point I was making was that, you know, the left feminists will relegate that dirty work to the right feminists, and this is not me praising the right feminists at all, because I don't praise feminists, but you know, it's like, you know, I'm talking in terms of the whole which gynocentrism to lift up, I suppose, like that, because when it comes to this sort of thing, you know, everyone ignores the man, right? So I'm not happy with either side with that. So.
That's right, exactly, that's right, and that's why a lot of people misunderstand this. They think that we might be supporting Christina Hoff-Sommers and so forth. She's still gynocentric in her own way, perhaps a different way to left-leaning feminists, but she's gynocentric. That's right. I always say that there's a lot of people who agree on the issues facing men and boys. We don't agree on what to do about it. So Christina Hoff-Sommers is quite right when she raises some of these issues, but then, you know, we will disagree with her on how to address them and so forth. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and one thing I'm kind of, I don't know if I should use the word, but resentful about, is that people like Christina Haas-Sommers are kind of, you know, because she is a woman and she is self-identified as a feminist and is talking about men's issues. And I guess this kind of gives some people the impression that, well, this is how we should talk about men's issues. So we have to mind our betters and be all polite and such, but you know, it's that's a form of duping. It's like I admit I was I accept the responsibility for my actions, but that's the basis on how I approached it for the longest time until I came to my senses, basically.
So virtually every anti-feminist is a former feminist.
Right, exactly.
So virtually all of us. And I can tell you, when I was 12 years old, I called myself a feminist.
Right, because it's sold to us as equality. So we
exactly.
At least identify it as such.
That's right. I actually had a situation, perhaps I got lucky actually. I actually had a situation when I was quite young. I was about 13, and I had a situation where I encountered an adult feminist, and I was pretty unhappy with the things that she said. And that caused me to take a step back and essentially consider myself a non-feminist for a long time, and then more recently an anti-feminist.
Yes.
But like just about every anti-feminist, I'm a former feminist.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So yes, I think that's something that is virtually is probably often missed too, even by the people looking at both sides. There's most people on our side came from the other side. Almost nobody goes from our side back to the other side. There've been a few cases of the media posting, "Oh, I'm a former MRA." When we look at these people, we can never find them in any of our chats or comments or anything like that. It's always pretty dubious. And yet, almost everybody on our side came from the other side.
Right, exactly. And the turnover usually kind of falls under the more nuttier ones, I think. At least that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. It's true. And there are people who come over who enter men's rights thinking, and they misunderstand. They're often usually trade cons, I think, do it quite a lot. They sort of wake up to feminism. They become anti-feminist, and they think men's rights is trade con anti-feminism, and then they realize it isn't, and rage quit.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right. Because
we see that a lot.
Right, because they're kind of resorting to prescribing how men should behave, and what kind of very over particular morals they have, they should have, and everything like that. And it
often comes back to essentialism again.
It's not about male self-actualization at all. It's more about it's more that appeal to collectivism over again. It's like, and I think that the men's rights message should be about the individualism of these men. I
agree. I think that's really central to it. And when I look at what different groups are saying, feminists say we should be like this, feminists say men should be like this, trade cons say men should be like that. What I come back with is leave men alone. Let men be the people they want to be. If a man wants to be macho and be at the gym, and that's good for him. But if he wants to be something else, just leave men alone. That's where I'm coming from, and I think that's probably a fairly mainstream view.
And I would say that it's a very libertarian sort of message to just leave me alone. I don't like to be pushed around. Those are important phrases.
Absolutely,
they really have proper meaning.
And we've mentioned this before, men's rights does have a strong libertarian streak in it. It's not just libertarianism, but there is definitely a strong libertarian streak in it. Individualism, individual responsibility, and so forth. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
And it does tend to attract a fair number of libertarians for that reason. And as I mentioned before, the Liberal Democratic Party in Australia, which is a libertarian party, has been supportive of our stuff in the past. And a fairly sizable number of, there's obviously a split in their party. I'm not a member of that party, by the way, but I know a number of people who are in it. They've supported things we've done. And a fair proportion of the party are non-feminist or anti-feminist. There are feminists in the Libertarian Party, in the LDP, I should say, but a fair proportion of them are anti-feminist. So you do see that, and I suspect that's probably growing over time. That's my feeling.
Do you think we can get some people on there, on this show?
I think we could probably manage that, actually. I actually know a couple of the leaders of the LDP. One in particular I've known for a little while, and they introduced me to see how I deftly failed to mention whether it's a man or a woman. That person introduced me to other leaders in the LDP, and so I suppose it is possible we might be able to look at maybe getting a leader in the LDP at some point. See what we can manage.
Right.
Yes, and to clarify, I had mentioned it before, but since when I mentioned the LDP, political parties in different countries can have the same name and be completely different.
Exactly.
There's a Liberal Democratic Party in the UK. They are completely unrelated to the Liberal Democratic Party in Australia.
Right, and I'm trying to go completely off the top of my head here. The word Republican, while it has a more obvious meaning here in the United States, if you would say Irish Republican, it means completely different, I think.
It does. And an Australian Republican means, and I am an Australian Republican. And actually, once I said this and I saw someone sort of suddenly swing their head, and you could see that their first thought was US Republican. When I said it, I was making a But to say one is a Republican in Australia means I seek an Australian Republic, because Australia is a constitutional monarchy with King Charles III as the head of state.
Yes.
And in 1999, we had a referendum which was defeated, but I voted in favour of a republic. If there's another referendum, unless they're completely screwing up the model, I will again vote in favour of a republic. So I think it's 99.9% likely that I would vote in favour of a republic again, unless they've done something completely insane with the model. And in fact, the Australian Republic is different. Is more similar to the meaning of Irish Republican, which essentially means to throw off British rule of part of the island of Ireland. Yes. So they're both about removing the monarchy, essentially. I guess it's a little bit different in the sense that Irish Republican is about recapturing the territory, I suppose, but still, it's got that aspect of removing the monarchy.
Right.
Yes. So I think it's important that just because the US does dominate media, and so the term Republican, we often hear discussions about your political system, and people will start to associate Republican with American Republican Party, but it means different things to different countries.
Right. Now, I'm kind of thinking of some kind of a funny thought here. Like, the more dominant one side is in like the global discourse, the more of its members are ignorant of the particulars of the parts that are not dominant. If that kind of made sense. It's like,
yes,
kind of that stereotypical, stupid American kind of a thing, because they seem to have like a lot of world presence, but they don't know a terrible lot most of the time.
Yes, it's a strange sort of almost paradox, isn't it? Where people who are closer to the centre of the political discourse are less informed on the whole because they don't know about the edges. That's exactly. Right, exactly. That's right. And the dominance of the US means that the dominance of the media means that we tend to know a lot more about the United States than Americans would know about Canada or Australia or even the UK. So exactly. It is interesting that
right.
Hopefully the internet partly offsets that, because people who want to spend the time can more easily research it.
I was thinking that, yeah.
Yes. And despite the stereotype of the dumb American, I have met many Americans who are very, very well informed on their own political system and other political systems and so forth. So I would encourage everyone, if you're an American, read the US Constitution if you haven't read it already. I've read the Australian Constitution a couple of times. I've read the US. I think I've skimmed the US Constitution. I probably should read it. It's cover to cover. It is interesting when you read a constitution and think about how your political system works. When I read the Australian Constitution, I was really stunned to discover that a whole bunch of things that I thought were enshrined in the Constitution are actually just enshrined in legislation and can be changed by the Parliament. Right. And I wouldn't be surprised if Americans found the same sort of things.
Right, yeah. One thing that I would like to get at some point that I've been meaning to, because I thought it was fun, but I just haven't gotten around to, is to have this kind of metal constitution, something that you hold in your hand. I think it was. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's like this pocket-sized constitution, right?
Give me the physical document or something? Or?
No. I'll explain. Like this small size, like I believe it was Bill of Rights or something like that, right? And it's made of metal, so you carry it, go to the airport, have it go off in a metal detector, and you just come here, take my rights.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
So there was a guy, I don't know if you know, but they finally got rid of these laws about 20, 25 years ago, but it used to be the case that taking encryption software across an international boundary, encryption software was generally considered to be munitions. And as a result, taking executable code, I think you could take source code, but taking executable code, which contained cryptography across international boundaries, was, at least theoretically, exporting munitions. And so this was really true for a long time, but governments obviously didn't prosecute people on this. But technically, a bunch of people were committing quite serious federal crimes by just taking a CD or something with SSH on it or something, open SSH or whatever, and taking it on a flight, internationally. So a guy went and got, I think it was the RSA algorithm, tattooed on his arm as a barcode.
Yeah.
So every time he crossed an international boundary, he was committing a federal crime because he was testing this, right? They ended up getting rid of it. So the US ended up, I think it was about 20, 25 years ago, getting rid of this law. What a lot of people didn't realize, a lot of us were complaining about the US. Every other Western country had the same law. They just weren't enforcing it. Australia had it and so forth. The same laws existed, they just weren't enforcing it. So, but anyway, they ended up realizing how silly it was and getting rid of it. But yeah, for a long time, it was actually considered to be a munition if you took encryption software across the international borders and so forth. And this sort of dated from, I guess, an earlier time when this sort of technology was something that countries were trying to protect, I suppose, or they didn't want it to be. They didn't want North Korea to get access to, RSA or something. But the truth is, they're not going to have a problem doing it. They can buy the journals, read the algorithm, code it themselves. They're not short of good coders.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, I always thought that was quite interesting. Mm-hmm. So, but I did love the guy who had the barcode on his arm. So I guess he still got it. It was in Perl. It was RSA in Perl as a barcode on his arm. So I forgot to mention what language it was in. It was in Perl. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I don't have any experience in Perl, but yeah.
Yeah, I did it a bit, but I was never. A lot of people when I first started getting involved with IT, really in the 90s, really loved it. Early 90s, but I was never that into it. So I was quite happy. It eventually sort of faded away.
Right.
But I did a bit of stuff in Perl. So the next one I had was female concentration camp guards.
Okay, we're going to swinging back to Nazism here.
Nazism. So I'm writing a history book at the moment. It just happens to be that the bit I'm working on at the moment involves Nazism and so forth. And this has prompted me to write a series of articles too about Nazism and so forth, and got me thinking about female concentration camp guards. So it's quite interesting. There are a lot of women were prosecuted at the Nuremberg trials, not as many as men, obviously, and they were a minority. One of the things about Nazism actually was that it tended to, unlike socialism, it tended to discourage women from working, actually. Maybe that's something I should put in as well. So a lot of women were sort of encouraged to pop out kids for the fatherland. That was a woman's duty under Nazism. And of course, we know about various programs that the Nazis had. But nevertheless, there were women who worked, and there were female guards, and there were some women who were actually essentially ordered to attend concentration camps as guards. But what I have found, having researched this, actually, we talk about there's things like the women are wonderful effect, where people tend to view women more favourably than men. Gynocentrism, where women tend to suffer lesser penalties than men and be let off a lot of the time. I have to say, I don't think that prosecutors were giving women a break in the Nuremberg trials. They hanged a lot of them. Yeah, exactly. I think that. This has helped me form the opinion that there is a limit to gynocentrism, and I think once you reach the point of being a Nazi guard, a concentration camp guard, gynocentrism wasn't saving you anymore. So they hanged a lot of them, and they gave them harsh penalties, like the men did too. Maybe if we analysed it, maybe we'd find on average the sentences were shorter or something. But a lot of those women, the ones who weren't hanged, they got quite severe penalties, 5-10 years in jail, a lot of cases, even for relatively minor, I call them minor matters in
right,
that context.
I understand.
You understand what I mean, right? In that context, for example, one woman there was no proof that she'd ever murdered any prisoners, although there were a couple that she was suspected of murdering, but she was known to beat the prisoners a lot. Mm-hmm. They gave her 10 years. So that sort of thing. Yeah. So, and I think a lot of them were released after about 5 or 6. But even so, even for just beating prisoners, that's still a fairly substantial penalty. So, anyway, I do find it interesting that a lot of these female prison guards, and some of them, as I said, were drafted into the camps. Some of them did voluntarily go there, but nevertheless, even if they were draftees, that's still they still were responsible for held to be responsible for their own individual actions once they got there. So. But I found that quite interesting. It does seem like there is that limit, and once you reach a certain point, yeah, being a woman's not going to save you.
Right.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts on female prison guards, but concentration camp guards.
I was under the impression that they were even more brutal sometimes.
Oh, in terms of brutality, yes. I'm talking about in terms of the penalties they got.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, obviously. Well, I mean, there were obviously many men in that context who showed extreme brutality.
Mhm.
There were many women who showed extreme brutality as well, and they were often, in general, the Nazis put female guards in charge of female prisoners, and these female guards in the concentration camps were routinely brutal to the female prisoners, and they didn't seem to be showing them any mercy by virtue of them being women as well. So, for example, one of the things that really got a lot of these guards was they would pick the prisoners, both adults and children, for either be sent to the gas chambers or to be sent to labor, certain duty labor, which would ultimately likely lead to their death. So, and that they were held to account on that. But these female guards were picking the women that were going to die and so forth. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of the lampshade with the human skin. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't heard it.
No. Right, so I'd heard of this quite early on. When I was a kid or a teenager, one story was that there had been at least a case. Obviously, these stories get distorted as they're repeated, and I'd heard, it's often claimed that there were many, lampshades that Nazis had made out of human skin of people who'd been murdered in the death camps and so forth. There's only one case where this is believed to have likely been true, and it's actually, I can't remember the guard's name now, but it's actually a female guard, one of the ones I was researching for the book. So I've got her in the book, and I do mention this. Now, what it was is there was a male doctor or something who was researching tattoos, and this female prison guard, a Nazi doctor, who's researching tattoos or something, and this female prison guard sort of took to this research with gusto, and started basically having the tattoos taken off dead prisoners and preserved, so to give to this doctor for his research. Anyway, the story goes on. There were a number of witnesses who claim, at least 2 eyewitnesses, who claim that on one occasion she had one of the tattoos, basically skin made into a lampshade, in her home. So she was also married to a Nazi guard. I think he may have actually been an officer. So the story goes that at least two eyewitnesses have seen this thing in her home, which is a lampshade made of human skin with a visible tattoo on it, and also apparently a visible nipple. And I know a lot of people are going to find this really distasteful and probably difficult to stomach. Apparently, even the Nazi leadership were a bit horrified by this. Not probably because they found the idea objectionable, but they were trying to hide the murder of people. And I think they found, so apparently the Nazi leadership told them to get rid of it. And so it was apparently only in her home for a few weeks. And then the orders came down from on high to her husband, who was a Nazi officer, to dispose of this thing and get it out of the house, because it's going to pretty quickly show what's going on. So it wasn't that they were concerned by the inhumanity of it. It's just they didn't want to get caught. Right. So anyway, so apparently this thing, the best evidence seems to suggest this thing did exist, but there may have only been one of them, and that they disposed of it pretty quickly. But yeah, she was. It does appear that she was having tattoos removed from prisoners and preserved, as I said, for this research.
Right.
Yeah. No, this is Nazi research. Anyway, so yes, so absolutely, they were brutal. That gives an example of the type of brutality that these women were prepared to. It is true that all the prisoners were apparently dead when these tattoos were removed, at least, thankfully. But yes, they were actually doing this, it would appear.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right.
Yeah. So that's the story behind the tattoo lampshade anyway. So, yeah. Female prison guards are absolutely awful. Except a lot of them were hanged. I watched a movie actually a little while ago on The Last English Hangman. And he actually went over, apparently, according to the story, now bear in mind it's a British movie, so excuse me, American audience, they rag on the Americans a little bit in this movie. They claim the Americans kept botching the executions of the Nazis, and they were hanging there and alive and all this, and they were dying really slowly. And the British didn't want to make the same mistake, so they hired their expert hangman, who did their civilian hangings, to go over and do the hangings of all the Nazis. And he apparently he was a real professional actually, and he apparently got 100% success rate, and every one of them was an instant kill, so no suffering from by the hanging. He's in Pierpoint, I think was his name. He was an interesting character actually. It's interesting to watch the movie, which I think is called the same thing, Pierpoint. And he actually tried to, from the point where the door was opened to do the hanging to the point where he pulled the lever to hang the person, he would always try to minimize the amount of time, basically to minimize their suffering, because they knew he was walking over to kill them, right?
Right.
And I think he got it, his record was something like 8 seconds from the point where the door opened to the point where he pulled the lever to kill them. It was something like 8 seconds. So he was a real professional with it. So anyway, he hanged all of the Nazi male and female prisoners who were convicted, who were condemned to death by within I guess it was in the British sector or however they divided it up. So anyway, interesting movie. If anyone wants to see that, yes. So I highly recommend it. A bit of a dark topic, but it's interesting. He was Britain's last hangman. And the last one, I don't know if you've got any other topics before I go on to one last one that I've got.
No, I think we should go right to it.
All right, no worries. So there was a video I sent you a link just before, and you said you'd seen it. Basically, a young woman it's a TikTok video, and a young woman saying how horrible she is to men when she's dating them and so forth, and basically manipulating them and so forth. And she's got quite a lot of pushback on that. I don't know when the video was taken actually, but it's only really surfaced and been widely distributed in the last couple of weeks. So I asked on Twitter if anybody knew what her name was. Now, the reason for this is I think that people should be called to account for their actions. It's not about doxing or anything like that. I'm certainly not going to, if her name's, I'm not going to repeat her name unless it's in the public sphere.
Yeah, right.
It's about people being called to account for their actions. I routinely put articles for Wiki for Men for people like this who say horrible things about men, and their name is not publicly known, because I think people should stand by what they say and should be called to account for what they say. I've been told in a Lad Bible has apparently published an article where she goes by the name Hensley. Now, whether or not that's her last name or stage name, I don't know. But apparently that is the name of the young woman who did this. And you've seen this video, as I said. So what are your thoughts on this video?
Well, this doesn't seem all that unique, I think. I think this is a pretty prevailing attitude among women.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how open she is? Or do you, I guess we see a fair number of women who are, but this one, perhaps she's shocked because she's so open about it, maybe? I don't know. That's my thought.
I'm not sure why it's... Well, I mean, when it gets circulated to our circles, it's basically just the latest in a series, as far as we're concerned.
That's right.
But
exactly.
Is this getting attention from non-anti-feminists?
Oh, absolutely. Lad Bible, for example, I think is probably is quite blue pill, and they're even. I think perhaps for the channel, one popular TikTok channel posted, so that might be what's caused it to get picked up. As you say, this is a fairly typical thing that we see, but this is being widely distributed, and she's been called to account for it from not anti-feminist sources, for example. And I find that really interesting, actually. So, as I said, I don't call myself an optimist, but I do think things are changing in a positive way. We've got a long way to go, but I do think there's greater recognition of these problems. And some people say, people say things like, "Oh, she shouldn't be allowed to say that. She should be shut down." My response is, no, absolutely not. We should hear her say it.
Oh yeah,
because
let's bring it out to daylight.
Proves our point. This is exactly what we're saying. And feminists have become much more open in many ways in the last 5 or 10 years. And they used to be quite good at being evasive, and I think they've lost that at some point. And they're much easier to nail down with their positions now than they were a few years ago. It's absolutely benefiting us.
Right, exactly. Well, they start talking more openly about this kind of stuff that they think they can't get in trouble for it. So, like you said, this could be a sign that they're starting to get what's coming to them, and they're being called out for their actions and such. But it's also a symptom of the fact about how bad things have gotten, that they can be so open about this kind of thing. I mean,
yes. I do agree with that. And about, could be going back 8-9 years. Well, I've been involved with Voice for about 8 years. So it must have been fairly early, probably about 8 years ago. I remember Paul Elam said in one of the, this has been repeated publicly since, so in one of the private chats in AVFM, was he felt that people, the things will get worse before they got better, in the sense that feminists felt their grip was slipping and they were going to come out fighting. And I think that's absolutely been borne out as true in the last 8 years, that things, as the feminist grip on the narrative has slipped, they have absolutely got more aggressive and more nasty and so forth. But in turn, that has allowed us to nail them down on these things. And so to a certain extent, it was their ability to some of them, I'm sure they won't get in trouble with this sort of thing, but people are being called out increasingly on it now. So I do think we have turned a corner somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Well, don't rest on your laurels. We need to do some more of it.
And that was actually my response. Exactly. I said we need to double down. Every time I say we need to double down. Yeah. When we see it, we must not rest on our laurels. Absolutely. Every time we see a success, that means we double down. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think we're doing a decent job of it, to be honest. Things are changing quicker than maybe not as quick as I'd like, but quicker than I expected.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And people say we should try this strategy and that strategy. I always say, you go and show us a different strategy, see it, and I'll absolutely be interested to see what success you get out of your proposed strategy. Well, I think what we're doing at the moment is working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I got a strategy for these people: lead by example. Less telling people what to do, more show it.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. When we really do get a lot of that, if only you did this, you'd succeed, or if only you did that, you succeed. You show us, you do it, and we will watch with interest. We'll take those. If it's successful, we'll adopt it. Yeah, but all talk, no action, I'm afraid, is what we see a lot of.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Talk is cheap, as they say. Mm-hmm. So, yep, If anyone out there, if you're unhappy with what's going on, just do something. Write a blog, submit articles to A Voice for Men, talk to your friends, do something.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are.
Yeah. It's going to be another new year of stuff to cover. And I got some, if we're at the end of our show right now, I got some closing thoughts, actually. So, so one thing I've seen a lot is that, we hope this, we always say it's kind of like a meme, honestly, like, is this year going to suck? Oh, somebody died this year already sucks. Let's just say tragedy befalls every year. There's no such thing as the perfect year. I mean, if there was, if our standards of a year not sucking are what they are, we're never going to see it. So forget about that. Sometimes the best way to have a good New Year is to forget about the New Year and just move on.
So that's true, actually. In fact, I don't really believe in New Year's resolutions so much, but I suppose this year I have actually changed. I've done something on a personal level that I haven't done before, and it actually came out of New Year's Eve.
Okay.
So I went to a major. Basically, we were going to a major sort of location where there was going to be fireworks and stuff on New Year's Eve. Yeah. I don't talk specifically about where I live. I live in southeast Queensland, which is the most populated part of the state of Queensland in Australia. I don't talk about specifically where I live. But anyway, I'm not much into fireworks. So, but my wife and daughter were really keen on seeing them. So I said, I'll drop you off. And I had an idea of another spot I wouldn't mind going. It's a little bit further away, a little bit quieter. I said, I'm happy to go there. I'll drop you off in the major city, and I'll pop out to this other location. So I did that. I dropped them off, and I headed out to this other location. Well, it's on the coast, this other location, which is only a sort of 15-minute, 20-minute drive from where they were. Absolutely beautiful. It's a pier going out a couple of 100 meters. I actually could see the fireworks when I got there. For one thing, unlike the city, in the middle of the city. There was plenty of parking where I was, which as a driver was immediately reduced my stress level. Walked out to the end of the pier, could see the fireworks, and there were about probably a couple of hundred people on the pier, so I wasn't the only one with this idea. So relaxing. And I've decided that every New Year's Eve now, unless there's some specific place we're going, I'm going to that pier. Absolutely fabulous. And I'm spending more time on the beach. I live relatively close to the beach, and I haven't been in the last few years, haven't been spending a lot of time that much time on the beach. And that's almost, you could almost call it a New Year's resolution. I'm spending it. And in fact, this weekend, I've been to the beach twice. So both Saturday and Sunday, I went to the beach.
I keep forgetting that it's actually kind of hot and
exactly, it's summer here. It's actually high summer at the moment. We're actually having a very cool summer. It's our second cool summer in a row. However, having said that, I generally don't go out in the sun enough that I need a lot of sunscreen. But if I'm going to be going out to the beach more, I'm going to start being a bit more serious about sunscreen because, I've already got a little bit of a burn from the last couple of days. So I will be more serious on sunscreen. But anyway, I had lovely, and I find it really relaxing. So I just even walking, just the wind and the water and everything. I think I've always said, if I'd been born in the 19th century instead of the 21st century, I think I would have joined the Royal Navy or something. And,
sure, yeah.
I think I just love the ocean. So
exactly. Yep. Oh, any other thoughts?
No, I think it's been a fantastic episode.
I think we knocked this one out of the park. A bit of a couple dark subjects, but it needs to be said.
Exactly. These things need to be talked about. It's so important that we don't forget. And as you pointed out, these terms have to maintain their power. The term Nazi has to continue to mean the fundamental, evil, if I could use that term, of what Nazism was, and not be watered down the way that the woke keep trying to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fabulous. Thank you very much, Vernon. We'll talk in 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.